Check. There we go. That's loud.
Yes, I did.
All right. So that works. Good morning, folks. It is 1 minute till 1 o'clock, so we'll go through the intro stuff and all that fun stuff. You are in the science track. Woo! Please be mindful, you must wear a mask in any event space in DragonCon, so please put on your mask, sir.
I got a waiver. You can get it from the Disability Services.
Okay. I wish they would have told us about that, but, okay, that's fine. All right. So, y'all are here for the training game. It's great, wonderful. Just letting you know a few things are coming up later on tonight. We do have Jurassic Park as a Terrible Zoo. That's going to be 4 o'clock at the Crystal Ballroom downstairs. It's going to be wonderful. And at 7 o'clock, we have Hard Science over in the Hilton Grand East, right around the corner right there. A few other things I want to follow up with. Please don't eat while in the panel room. We're trying to keep masks up as much as possible for those that can wear masks, just to make sure that everyone prevents the spread of COVID. Lastly, the thing I want to cover is our charity, Open Hands. It's a charity group in Atlanta that's focused on delivering nutritional meals to those most disfortunate, disabled, those kind of folks, to make sure they have healthy nourishment and can live long, healthy lives. So if you have any spare change, feel free to donate. You can donate online as well, I believe, as well. But doing it this way, you make DragonCon match you dollar for dollar to the first $10,000, if I recall correctly. With that, the training game.
The training game, yay! We're all here to have a good time and be friends today. Hi, everybody. My name is Arras. I am a professional zoologist. I've been an animal trainer for something like 6 years. And today we're playing the training game, which is a totally professional tool that animal trainers use in order to get some perspective on how animals think. It's also a hilarious party game. So, really quick, I'm going to go over the rules. So it's really simple. You have one person who's going to be your trainer and one person who's going to be your animal. You're not allowed to talk because real animals, unfortunately, don't understand English. So the only thing the trainer is allowed to say is the word good. You use the word good to tell the animal that they have done the right thing. So when we get started, we're going to have our 2 volunteers. Our animal's going to go over in the corner and plug their ears and go la, 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 la. And we're going to ask the audience to give us a suggestion of a behavior that our trainer is going to train our animal. Once we have gotten that ready, we're going to go. The animal's going to do stuff. The trainer is going to tell them when they've done a good job, and hopefully by the end, the animal will do the activity. Now, this is a game, but it is not a competition. There is no winning. There is no losing. Even if you fail to train your animal, or if you're an animal and you fail to learn your behavior, you've still done a great job, and everybody who participates gets a ribbon. Yay! So, first things first, because it is a little hard to understand if you've never seen animal training, we're going to do a little demonstration. So the demonstration behavior I'm going to do is called targeting. Targeting is one of the easiest things to train. So I need a volunteer, preferably an adult. Sorry, kids, you can participate later, but I'm just an adult for the first one. Who does not know what a target is? It's cheating if you already know what that is. I have a volunteer? Anybody? You in the front. All right. So remember, we're not allowed to talk. I'm not going to put the mic down because it doesn't really matter if the audience can hear the word good as long as the animal can hear the word good. Okay. Good. Does that make sense to everybody? Oh, volunteer, you get a ribbon. Yay! Does that make sense to everybody? We got the idea? Yeah, all right. We do have a request from the science track. They're filming us, FYI. So they would like us to stay on camera, which is basically stay between these 2 TVs, and don't go around behind the table, but other than that, you have this whole space to work with. So do I have 2 volunteers? I need 2 volunteers in the back. You both had your hands up right away. Little girl, you can be next, okay? Keep that in mind. You're going to be in the next round. Who wants to be the animal and who wants to be the trainer? You want to be the animal. Okay, you want to be the trainer? He's confident. All right, you go in the stand in the corner and plug your ears and go la, 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 la. No cheating. Okay, who wants to suggest a behavior for our trainer to teach our beautiful animal over here? What? I don't know that she's going to do a somersault in that outfit. Turning left. Okay, so we're going to turn in a circle specifically towards the left. Got it? All right, animal, you ready? I'm going to go stand out of your way. No talking. Hey! Wait, volunteers, do you want some ribbons? You don't have to take them if you don't want, but they're free. All right, we have one volunteer already. You want to get up here? You can change your mind if you want. I won't be offended. Who else wants to volunteer? You want to volunteer with this lovely little lady? Come on up. All right, who wants to be the animal and who wants to be the trainer? Oh, I am caught. Dragon feet. You're going to be the animal? All right, you got to go in the corner and plug your ears and go la 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 la. No cheating. All right, we need a behavior for this wonderful young animal over here to do. Jump. Okay, you're going to train her to jump. You got that? All right. He feels confident. All right, animal. She can't hear because she plugged her ears. Come on over. Ready to go. He's thinking real hard. So we'll talk a little bit about behavior while we're doing this. So this is a fun game because you might think, oh, well, this is what I'll do, and then the person that you're working with does something completely unexpected because different people think differently, just like animals think differently from we do. You're the trainer. You get to decide if the animal's done the behavior or not. Hey! So both of our trainers thus far have done something we call modeling. So a lot of times if we want an animal to do something, we'll do it and see if they'll repeat it. This works better with some animals than others. Humans are social animals, right? So we like to do things that other humans are doing, so we're usually pretty good at modeling. But some animals that aren't social, you can do whatever you want, and they just stare at you because that's nice, human. And of course, everybody's different, so some humans don't do it very well either. But that is one really useful tool when you're trying to teach somebody to teach something to an animal, is you can model it for your animal. We have 2 more volunteers. I forgot to give her. For our volunteers, if you want a ribbon, you can have it. Do you want to take her ribbon? Oh, she's going to come up. There you go. We have 1 volunteer. Does anybody want to play the training game with this person? You right there. Sonic the Hedgehog is going to come up. Sonic, do you want to be the animal or the trainer? How appropriate. Sonic the Hedgehog is going to be our animal being trained today. All right, Sonic, you're going to go stand in the corner and plug your ears and go la 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 la. No cheating. Yeah, you're trying not to hear what anybody's saying. It's a secret. Shh. All right, who wants to suggest a behavior for our wonderful trainer over here? You got to plug your ears. There you go. Say it quietly. Oh, did you hear that? I did, yeah. Okay. All right, Sonic, we're ready for you. Yeah, come on over. Yeah, Sonic. Woo! So that was another good job, guys. You want your ribbons? There you go. Good job. So that was another really good example. So I'm usually actually really bad at this, but professionally, usually when we're going to train an animal behavior, we write what's called a training plan, which is exactly what it sounds like. We write down what we think we're going to do, and sometimes you write this detailed explanation of all the steps you're going to go through to teach the animal. And the very first thing you try, the animal does something completely wrong. And you go, ooh, a time to change track. And a lot of times by the end, you've done something completely different than the plan you wrote. You got to be flexible if you're going to be a trainer. All right, we got any more volunteers in the audience? We want to be an animal. We want to be a trainer. There's one, there's two. Come on up. For when we have adult volunteers, you're welcome to suggest slightly more complicated behaviors, although do keep in mind what people are wearing. I have actually played a training game one time. Both of the people involved were professional trainers, which is cheating a little bit, but somebody trained somebody to do a somersault through their legs. All right, animal, go over in the corner, plug your ears, say la la la, don't cheat. He is an adult, so you can feel free to suggest something a little more complicated if you want. Well, that one, well, good luck with that. I like that you feel like you can do it. You want me to demonstrate it for you really quick? No, she's good. All right, you feel ready? Okay, I believe in you. Animal, you ready? Come back on over. Remember, no talking. The only thing you can say is good. I'm actually going to explain that a bit, but we'll let you do this first. Well, don't say it. He's not a real animal. He can actually understand English. What? Whatever you feel in your heart.
Whatever you feel, man.
This is another thing that happens. Sometimes you go to train an animal and you do something and they stare at you. You go, okay. That's okay. We're learning today. It's supposed to be funny. This is a party game. He's doing it though. Yeah. Feel free to take your ribbons. All right, we're going to take a little break from volunteers for a second. If you're thinking of volunteering, contemplate it really hard right now. We're going to talk about something called a bridge. So I said the only thing you can say to your animal is the word good. This is what we call a bridge. A bridge bridges the gap between the behavior and the reinforcement. We're pretending to use reinforcement because you're humans and you can understand that the word good is itself a reinforcement. But basically, when you reinforce an animal, so that's like if your dog does what you want and you give them a treat, you're reinforcing that behavior. When you reinforce a behavior, you want that behavior to continue and to happen more often. But a reinforcement always reinforces the thing that immediately precedes it. So if your dog sits and you go to give them a treat, and before you give them the treat, they spin in a circle, what have you reinforced? Spinning in a circle. So the bridge tells them exactly what they're getting that reinforcement for. When the dog sits, you say good. The dog has been trained to know that the word good is a reinforcer. That's not naturally occurring. The dog now knows that what he's getting a treat for is not spinning in a circle. It is, in fact, sitting. So that's why we're doing the bridge. When the animal does the right thing, you say good. That way, if they've done something else in the meantime, they know specifically what it is that they did right. Does that make sense to everybody? Anybody have any questions? If you have any questions about training, you feel free to interrupt the training game to ask.
I have a Vietnamese, and she does the bacon stare.
Yeah.
I mean, I guess if they don't understand modeling,
Yeah.
how do you initiate a behavior?
Well, there's a lot of different ways. It's technically bad, but for some animals, it's a little necessary. And like we said, when you want to teach a dog to sit, people always shove down the dog's butt, and you haven't really taught the dog to sit. You've taught the dog to let you shove its butt. But some dogs really do need that, like, they're just going to stand there and stare at you. They're not going to initiate anything, which it's a lot easier to train an animal that will initiate things. Some animals are like, what if I do this? What if I do this? What if I do this? And you can do what's called capturing a behavior. Like if they do something and you like it, you can just reinforce it even if you didn't ask them to do it. And that's cool. Do that again. Some animals won't do that. They will just sit there and stare at you, and you got to do something to try and encourage them. So dogs, a lot of times, they can't bend their heads back like this, so if you hold something over their head, a lot of them will sit so that they can look at it. Some dogs will just back up, so depends on your dog. That's the classic way to do it. May or may not work. Every animal's different. All right. Do we have any more volunteers who want to play the training game? There's two. Come on up. We're both adults, so feel free to suggest something a little more complicated, but do keep in mind what they're capable of doing.
Sure, that's fine. Okay.
All right, whoever's the animal, go stand in the corner and plug your ears. Don't cheat. All right, do we got any suggestions for a behavior? What? Point up? Okay. All right. Animal, We're ready for you. Remember, no talking. He's ready. He's in animal mode. Good. You guys want ribbons?
Sure. Yes.
I have a limited number, but I have quite a few, so hopefully we don't run out. Now, really, technically, if you're training a behavior, it isn't considered train unless the animal will do it consistently on cue. There's actually 4 things, and I can never remember what all 4 of them are, but one of them is the animal has to only do it when you ask. So, like, if you're in a session with the animal can't just randomly play dead. They have to do it when you ask them to play dead. They need to not do it when you ask them to do something else. If you ask them to sit and they play dead, it's not a trained behavior. I can never remember the other 2, but basically they should only do it when you ask them to, and they should consistently do it when you ask them to. So if you ask them to play dead, they should play dead pretty much every time. So really, if you wanted to prove a behavior was trained, you'd need to ask them to play dead a couple times in a row, but for the sake of this game, you only need to do it once. All right, do we have any more volunteers and or questions? We have an animal. We have a trainer? All right, come on up. Animal, go stand in the corner and plug your ears. No cheating. Does anybody want to? Crow. You feel like you can do that one? Okay. All right, animal, come on over. Remember, there's no winning or losing in this game, and even if you fail, you still did a good job. You're not allowed to talk, but you can make other noises. Hey! Take your ribbons. Now, a couple interesting things happened in that one. So one thing that I noticed there is what we call a superstitious behavior. I kind of talked about this a little bit with the dog and the sitting and the turning. Sometimes people will get a dog that every single time they ask the dog to sit, the dog will sit, turn around a circle, and then sit down again. And this is what we call superstitious behavior. The dog thinks that they need to turn in a circle in order for it to count. So in that, there was kind of 2. For one, he barked one time, and she said, good. And then he was like, oh, you want me to bark? And he did it several times in a row. This is a superstitious behavior. He thinks he needs to do it now. The other thing I noticed is that technically the only thing we asked for was a crow, but every single time he was doing this, well, I'd also call that a superstitious behavior, because even though it technically wasn't part of the behavior, he thought he needed to do it in order for it to count. So that's a superstitious behavior. The other thing we have is this happens a lot of times. You get an animal, you accidentally reinforced something or bridged something. Now that's a thing they have to do for the rest of forever. They got reinforced for once. Part of the problem is that intermittent reinforcement is actually more reinforcing than consistent reinforcement. There's a story I heard about this one time. It's a really great example. Somebody said, I took my dog for a walk one time, and we found a pie in a bush. And now every single time we walk past that bush, he has to check to see if there's another pie, because it's the magic pie bush. And people go, well, but he only ever found a pie once. And I said, yeah, but one time he found a pie. There might be a pie another time. So he's going to check every single time. This means it's really, really, really hard to get rid of behaviors. Once you've trained an animal in behavior, if you stop reinforcing it, they're like, but you like this thing, right? I'm going to keep doing it on the off chance that maybe one of these days you're going to reinforce them for it again. So don't teach animals something you don't want them to do, because they'll probably do it for the rest of forever. All right, do we have any more volunteers? Sonic wants to go again. He's going to be the animal this time. All right. All right, animal, go stand in the corner, plug your ears, no cheating. We need, this wonderful trainer right here needs a behavior to teach his beautiful animal over in the corner. Okay, did you hear that, Sonic? Did you hear it? You're going to teach him how to sit, okay? Got it? So ready? All right, animal. We're ready for you. Come back on over. Yay! Good job, son. Do you want to? Sonic already got a ribbon, but you want one too? Excellent work. See, everybody can play the training game. Do we have any questions and/or volunteers? Got a question.
Yes. So we have 2 dogs, and these 2 dogs, we can't get them to fetch. So even to go to the ball in the first place when we throw it, not to mention even try to return it if by chance they do go to the ball.
Yes.
So how would you?
So one of the really important aspects in training is motivation. You got to figure out what motivates the animal. As professional trainers, we like to say, oh, I can train any animal to do anything, but in reality, sometimes some animals just aren't going to do certain things. But sometimes an animal, you struggle to teach them something for the longest time, and it's just a matter of figuring out what specifically motivates them. So the easiest animals to train are social and highly food motivated, because food is probably the easiest reinforcer ever. You can use anything the animal wants to achieve can be a reinforcer, but you don't usually have to train animals to like food. So like you have to train an animal to understand what a bridge is. So technically a bridge is a type of reinforcer, but it's a secondary or trained reinforcer. Most animals don't need to be taught to like food. But I have met lots of animals that are really not food motivated. You're like, here's a piece of food, and they're like, that's nice. So you have to find out what motivates the dog. Now, usually fetch is really easy to train most dogs because most dogs are really motivated to go get the ball. They think that's fun. So probably what's going on is that your dog is not particularly motivated by that toy, not a particularly toy-motivated dog. So you're going to have to figure out what else motivates the dog and then connect that thing to the ball. You could, one thing you could do, basically what you want to do is train the dog to pick up the ball. So what you can do is if you can get the dog to take the ball from you, give him something for taking the ball, and then maybe put it down, and maybe he'll pick it up, and then maybe you can go a little farther. This is another thing. This is what we call approximations. Now, a lot of our trainers today playing the training game have managed to get the behavior in one go. They did one thing, and they got the desired behavior. But sometimes it took a couple steps, right? So we call this approximations. So maybe I want the dog to fetch, and if I just throw the ball, he doesn't go get it. So I'm going to approximate that behavior instead. So first I'm just going to get him to take the ball from me. Okay, he's taking the ball. Well, now I want him to pick it up without having to be handed it. So I'm trying to get him to take it up off the floor, right? And then maybe I put it a little way because now we've got one more step. Not only does he have to take the ball, he has to go to the ball first, right? And then we can slowly make the ball go farther and farther away, so he has to go farther and farther. And then you can approximate getting it quickly. Are you right? So those are what we call approximations, which is how you can teach a really complicated behavior. So, we had I used to do a live animal show, and we had a behavior where the parrot would come out and do something, and then climb a rope and do something else, and then climb over here. And people are like, well, how do you get the bird to do all that? And I say, it's one behavior, right? You think it's 4 behaviors, but really that's one behavior. I want them to do all those things every single time, and you train it backwards. Which is the other thing people don't know. You ask them to do the last thing first, and then you add things to it. So that's our approximation. In that case, we would be going from the last step to the first step. We'd approximate that whole complicated chain of behaviors. But approximations, and again, like I always say, if professional trainers say, I can teach any animal to do anything, but sometimes it's just not going to work. Yeah, some animals just really aren't motivated to do things. Are you volunteering, or are you asking a question? Okay. Okay, this is a great question, and we're going to have a tiny bit complicated explanation first. So most people don't really know, this is really technical, but a reinforcement is any stimulus which causes a behavior to increase in frequency, and a punishment is any stimulus which causes a behavior to decrease in frequency. So this doesn't really coincide with what most people think of as punishment and reinforcements, because a reinforcement and a reward are often the same thing, but they're not necessarily the same thing. So a positive reinforcement is when you give the animal something they want. So if I hand the animal a treat, I'm positively reinforcing something. A negative reinforcement is when I take away something that the animal does not want. So it's actually really hard to do negative reinforcement because you have to positively punish first. So to positively punish, we introduce something the animal doesn't like, that they want to avoid. You kind of can't take away something they want to avoid without first introducing something they want to avoid, and you usually want to avoid positive punishment. It's the worst thing you can do. So usually you're not going to be negatively reinforcing anything. Although there is one example I can think of. This is a real life thing. I used to work with dolphins. We wanted the dolphin to go from this enclosure to this enclosure, and for whatever reason, she really hated doing that. So they'd ask her to do it, and she wouldn't do it, and they'd ask her to do it, she wouldn't do it. Normally they just let her get away with it because you don't want to force animals to do things if you can avoid it. But one time it was an emergency. There was something dangerous in the first enclosure, and they needed to get her out of there. So what they'd do is they'd take boat hooks, and they would pull the nets up, and she didn't like that. So they'd start pulling the nets up, and as soon as she went through, the boat hooks go away. So first we've positively punished. We introduced the boat hooks. They're a thing that's scary. She doesn't like them. As soon as she does what we asked her to, we take them away. But you'll notice I said it was an emergency. We would not have done that if it wasn't an emergency because we don't want to positively punish our animals if we can avoid it. The reverse of that, though, is that negative punishment, if you can't use positive reinforcement, your next step is usually going to be negative punishment. The example of this, this involves bribery, too, which bribery isn't necessarily bad, but you usually don't necessarily want to bribe animals if you can avoid it. So I had a parrot. I really needed him to fly over to me, and he didn't want to do it, and he didn't want to do it, and he didn't want to do it. So I pulled a nut out of my pouch, and I showed him the nut. I'm now bribing him to come over. And he comes over, right? I give him the nut, which this is another mistake people make, is they'll bribe the animal, they'll show him the nut, he comes over, they put the nut away and give him something else. Well, no, you offered him that nut. It's his nut now. You can't take it away. Because now he doesn't trust you anymore. And trust is really important when we're working with animals. We've got to build trust. They got to know that they can trust you, that what you promise them, they will get from you. Because otherwise, they're not going to do anything for you. But if I show him the nut and he still refuses to come over, I'm going to put it away. Right? He didn't do the thing I asked. He doesn't get the nut. Technically, this is negative punishment, taking away something that he wants. A lot of times, too, it's really weird to think about, but we give animals a timeout. If I'm doing a session with an animal, they won't do what I'm asking to. A lot of times I'll walk away. This only works with animals that want you to be there. But if the animal wants you to be there, they like doing sessions with you, they like the opportunity to earn reinforcements from you, and you walk away, you've just taken away something they wanted. They wanted you to be here, and you left, right? So technically, that's also a negative punishment. But negative reinforcement's really hard. It very rarely comes up. So
you've told the participants they can't talk because animals don't understand speech.
yes.
Some of the participants are switching to hand signals like this to let the other person know, you sort of got it, but not quite. How much do animals understand body language or hand signals?
It depends really heavily on the animals. So like some animals are really, like body language is very important to them. I've worked a lot with birds, a lot of birds. So fun fact, very few animals have facial expressions. This is mostly a primate thing. Interestingly, dogs have it too, but only dogs. Most other canines don't really have very expressive faces. Dogs specifically have this adaptation because they spend a bunch of time around humans, and humans use facial expressions. But like if you work with an owl, that's just what his face looks like. People say he looks really grumpy. I say that's just what his face looks like. Can't actually change it. So owls rely really heavily on body language, so it can be really easy to interact with an owl using body language. You know, I had an owl that understood really well if I turned away from him or things like that. They'll use their ears to communicate, stuff like that. Other animals, not so much, but it kind of depends on the animal. If you have a species that doesn't really use a lot of body language, they're probably not going to get it very well. We're all humans, and humans use a lot of body language and facial expressions, which is also why I've noticed a lot of people aren't saying good. But if you're standing there looking like this at your animal, and the animal does the right thing, you go, well, your animal just knows that they did the right thing, right? This is also, there's a really famous story of this horse that could count, right? And the way the horse would count was that when you asked him to count to 5, he would start tapping his foot. And he would stop at 5, and people go, oh, the horse knows how to count. No, the horse is really good at reading facial expressions. And you get micro-expressions. People don't think they've reacted to something, but they have. They tiny little movement, or their eyebrows moved or something, and the horse would see when people would react with excitement because he got to 5, and they go, right, because they anticipating him doing the right thing and stopping. And he would stop when he saw people get excited. So to test whether or not he could really count, they put him in a room alone and asked him to count, and he just kept going because he didn't have any. That's what we call an ending cue. So sometimes you ask an animal behavior, you just ask them to keep doing it until I ask you to stop. So like when they teach dolphins to do it's called a bow, when they do the jump, usually they say go bow, and the dolphin will do it until somebody tells them to stop. So that's what's going on there.
A different question. What are some common warning signs that
Once again, it depends really heavily on the animal. And sometimes, too, like some individuals or some species, like I mentioned owls already, but owls are really interesting because owls are really stupid, actually. Owls, a lot of their body language has to do with like a little bit with their ears and like puff up and stuff, but it's a lot easier to read if you're a bird or if you're really familiar. And I absolutely have gone into a room because I looked in the room and the owl looked fine, and I opened the door and he looked fine, and I stepped in the room and the owl flew at my face. I've also had animals actually that would use this against me, which is mostly a really smart animal thing. So I used to work with parrots. People go, "Oh, don't you love parrots?" And I say, "Sure, as long as they don't live in my house." If the parrot has his own home and I can leave him there at night, then sure, parrots are great animals. They're very smart. But I had 2 parrots. One was named Koji, one was named Zeppo. If you asked them to be picked up and they wanted to be picked up, they would pick up a foot. Now, Zeppo, he was very reliable, very consistent. If you asked him to step up and he stared at you like you were stupid, don't put your hand anywhere near him. He's going to bite you. If you ask him to step up and he puts his foot up, he's perfectly safe. You can put your hand next to him. He'll step up. He'll be nice. He'll be pleasant. He won't say yes unless he really means it. Koji, on the other hand, knew that we were very trusting, would believe him when he told us stuff. So if Koji was mad at you, you'd ask him to step up, he would refuse. We usually ask twice just to make sure that they were really saying no and not that they just didn't see us or whatever. So I'd ask him again, he'd pick his foot up. I'd go, I'd put my hand over and he'd bite the shit out of me. Because he knew that if he really wanted to bite me and he said, "Sure, I'll step up," I would put my hand right next to him where he could reach me. And so he was using body language. He'd been taught that body language, that this body language means I'm willing to step up. And he was using that against me. He would put his foot up so that I would put my hand within biting range. Oops. Some animals aren't quite that smart, though. If you can read their body language, it's very consistent. But so a lot of times it just takes knowing the animal really well. So like I used to work with a serval, which is a big cat. They're about this big. People would all go, "He's so cute." And I said, "Yeah, it's like 5 house cats all at once." He's really dangerous, actually. And they're not really social animals, but he did like to be petted. So sometimes you'd go in with him and he wanted to be petted. And one time I went in and I didn't have any food, and he was, being all kind of friendly and letting me pet him. And I knew him really well, and I started seeing like the way he was moving his tail and the way he was holding his fur. I'm like, he's getting a little aggressive right now. He's going to bite me any second. And lo and behold, he did bite me about 10 seconds later. And the trainer who was with me was very surprised because she didn't know his body language. And she goes, "He was so friendly right now, and then he just bit you out of nowhere." And I said, "It wasn't out of nowhere. He did give me some signs. I just couldn't do anything about it because I didn't have any food." Normally, if I was in that situation, I would have thrown food and left. Which is, you got to be careful doing that because otherwise you teach the animal to aggress at you to get food. But, yeah. No. So actually, there are stories about people training like the spider in the bathroom. Now, obviously, you can't train a spider a particularly complicated behavior, but does everybody know who Pavlov is? Yeah, so Pavlov, that's... he took something that the animal wasn't physically wasn't consciously controlling. So he taught the dogs to drool on command. So obviously, the dog wasn't making a decision to drool. So like there are people who train spiders to fear like a little red light, right? Or something like that. So you can train animals that have very little intelligence. There's a certain amount of intelligence required. Like jellyfish don't have brains. You can't teach a jellyfish anything. They don't have brains. They have 0 intelligence. They're basically stomachs. So a certain level of intelligence is required, but it's pretty low. Now, if you want to teach an animal a really complicated behavior, yeah, you do have to have a certain level of intelligence. I keep bringing up owls, but they're such a great example. I'd have an owl out on my glove, and people go, "Does he do any tricks?" And I said, "Sure, he's standing on a glove calmly in front of a stranger." That's a pretty great trick for an owl. You're not going to teach him much else.
So, I got blue jays in my yard.
Yeah.
Food motivated.
Yes.
I keep putting out food, sitting quietly nearby, waiting for an hour or two. Maybe one will come by, and the moment it sees me, it freaks out. I've been doing this at this point for a few months. What else should I do to make them cool with me just sitting there?
That's really hard. It's really hard with an animal you don't know. So like when I was at the aquarium and I know what's going on in that animal's life pretty much all the time, because you don't know, like, for instance, what other people are doing. And sometimes an animal will have a really bad experience and they'll just never ever get over it. So like I used to work with this owl. He every single time you'd go in, he'd freak out because one time he had a really bad experience, and so when people walked into the room, he'd freak out. It was really interesting, actually, because it was really clear that he understood the difference between inside and outside, because if you were standing directly outside the door, he was fine, he was calm, he'd eat, he'd do whatever. As soon as you walked in the door, he was like, ah. So it's really hard to say, because like, I don't know what else is going on in those blue jays' lives. Also, we call that habituating. So like, I used to work with this hawk, and when I first started working with her, she was really, really nervous. If you'd walk in, she'd kind of freak out. And so my boss used to send me to go and sit in her enclosure for an hour at a time, just sitting there. I'd take naps in there with her. Yeah, so part of that too is the food is insufficiently motivating is what's going on. So a lot of times we call this an approach avoidance conflict. So the bird wants to approach the food, but they want to avoid you. You have to make whatever they want to approach more desirable than whatever they want to avoid. So like I eventually taught that hawk to come over to me because she wanted the food more than she wanted to avoid me, which was really hard because you don't actually want animals to be like hungry. Like really traditionally they used to basically starve animals to get them to do things. This is a terrible idea. This is how you get attacked by like a sea lion. That's actually a thing that used to happen at SeaWorld. SeaWorld started not starving their sea lions, and suddenly the sea lions were super friendly. What a shocking revelation. So basically what's going on is that the approach avoidance conflict is that the animal wants the food but does not want to be near you, and you are scarier than the food is desirable. So it's hard to say without having like knowing these animals or anything, but you got to find something that's more motivating than whatever food you're putting out. So it might be the quality of the food, like sometimes you have a parrot that's willing to do something for a nut but not a piece of pellet, because the nuts, usually foods are more desirable if they're fattier. Yeah, there you go. Give it a go. Blue jays are also super smart, so if they have had a bad experience with a person, it might be that they've just decided that humans are dangerous and they're going to avoid them for the rest of forever. Probably. A couple of considerations. When I'm thinking about whether or not to teach an animal a behavior, one thing I think about is their natural history. So like, this is the thing we say. People say, what's the difference between a behavior and a trick? And I say a behavior is something that the animal might do on their own, and a trick is something that they wouldn't. So if you ask an elephant to stand up on its hind legs, that's a behavior because they do sometimes do that in the wild. If you ask them to stand on their front legs, that's a trick because they don't do that in the wild. So I like to think about when I'm trying to teach an animal behavior, I like to think about what kinds of things they'd naturally do. So like if you teach a parrot to talk, parrots maybe don't usually say hi, but they do love to imitate things. So asking them to imitate you is totally within the range of their natural behaviors. I haven't worked extensively with reptiles, so I don't really know what ball pythons and bearded dragons normally do. But that's a good way to start, is to think about things that they might normally do and then just ask them to do it on cue or modify it a little bit. I'm trying to think if I've ever heard of a trained python. I think the answer is no, but that doesn't mean anything. I also don't work extensively with reptiles. I know you can train bearded dragons to walk on a leash. It's very cute. Okay, do we have any more volunteers who want to play the training game? We have one. Does anybody else want to play? We have two. Or you can play the next round. We'll do 2 rounds. Then we can have more questions if people want. All right, who wants to be the animal? Who wants to be the trainer? You want to be the trainer? Are you okay with being the animal? All right, animal, go stand in the corner, plug your ears. No cheating. Whoa, that's a tricky one. I like it. You feel confident? Yeah. All right, animal, you can come back. Remember, no talking. You can make other noises, though. This is like the thing where you shove the dog's butt to the floor. Sometimes it works. All right, there was a condition to this behavior, though, so you have to check to make sure that your animal understands what you're actually asking from them. I'm going to give you a hint that might give it away. Ask the animal to do the behavior to something, a different object that meets the qualification. We're going to cheat a little bit. Animal, do you know what you're being asked to do?
Point at objects.
All right. So we haven't quite achieved it yet. This is why this is really tricky, because you got to figure out how to make sure your animal knows what specifically about the object is interesting. You can. And we're using well, you don't say bad because animals don't really understand the word. They mostly understand the tone. But you can fail to bridge something. If the animal does something that's not the right thing, usually I just don't react. So I'm going to take a wild guess and say our animal probably thinks you're asking her to point to things that you have pointed to, which is not quite what we're asking.
Is it important to have an action or something that triggers the animal to know that they're supposed to start doing the thing?
You can do that. That's what we call a cue. So technically, in order for a behavior to be trained, it has to be put on cue. So that's something that you do that tells the animal they need to initiate the behavior. That's a little tricky because usually you have to get them to do the behavior first and then you put it on cue. That bridge was a little late. This is actually really good. I'll explain why in a little bit. Animal, do you know what you're being asked to point to?
Pointing at black.
Yay! So the really tricky part there was, at first, you'll notice that our beautiful animal right, or you can get a ribbon if you want. Our beautiful animal right here was specifically only pointing to things that the trainer was pointing at and was only doing it when the trainer pointed to something. So, that's why I was saying I think she thinks she's being asked to point to the things you're pointing to, right? So what you're trying to do is get the animal to start pointing at random things, because once they start pointing at things, you can indicate to them which are the right things and which are the wrong things. And usually when an animal does the wrong thing, we just ignore it. There are several exceptions to that. So the classic wisdom if you have a biting animal is to just ignore it when they bite you. I have trained several animals not to bite by doing this. One was a rat, one was a ferret. You have to be kind of to just sit there and let the rat bite you and not react is kind of hard, actually. And I was wearing a glove, so she wasn't actually hurting me. I could feel it, but she wasn't breaking skin or anything. But if an animal is sufficiently dangerous, you don't want to ignore these undesirable behaviors. So I used to work with a big macaw, and she would bite, but she would just bite really gently. But you don't want her to escalate that behavior, so we don't want to ignore it because the parrot wants you to pay attention to her. So if she bites you gently and you ignore it, a lot of times she'll respond by biting harder. If she bites hard enough, she's going to hurt you. So when she bit us, we dropped her on the floor. And people would always go, "That's so mean." I said, "She's a parrot. She has wings. She can fly. She's fine." I used to do that, too. I had an owl that really liked gloves sexually. So if he got a little frisky with the glove, we'd just dump him. And people would say, "That's so mean." I said, "He can fly. He's a bird." Now, I might not dump like a rat on the floor, but A bird, I usually feel confident with that one.
Would that be an example of positive punishment?
Not necessarily. Mostly I was just taking her away from my arm. Because I was trying to get the behavior to decrease in frequency. That's a really great question, actually. Now I'm like thinking really hard about it. I'm not sure. Sometimes it's a matter of how you frame it. So like people would always be really surprised when like the parrot was sitting on my arm and I would just feed him and they go, he didn't do anything. I said, sure he did. He's sitting calmly on my arm. That's a behavior. It's a behavior I like. So I'm like, depends, because mostly I wasn't really thinking of it in terms of punishment reinforcement. I was mostly thinking of it and I would like her to stop biting my arm. So I'm taking the arm away from her. I guess you could think of it as negative punishment because the thing she wants is your arm and your attention, actually, and I would take both of those away from her. So I think it would be negative punishment because I'm taking something desirable away. That's a great question. It's really complicated. It's really hard to understand behavior in general.
So I always have a difficulty keeping track of like positive, negative reinforcement, punishment, and all that. So in my head, I'm trying to take it, and it's like positive is adding, negative is reinforcement.
Yeah, so positive is giving, negative is taking.
Reinforcement is
Desirable.
desirable and punishment is
Undesirable. Well, that's not exactly true because negative punishment would be taking something desirable away.
negative punishment. Okay.
And positive punishment is introducing something that is not desirable.
Yeah, so giving something undesirable. Positive punishment would be
Giving something undesirable. And then negative punishment would be taking away something desirable. So the parrot wants my attention and I walk out of the room, I'm negatively punishing her.
negative punishment is taking away something.
Yeah. So if you give the dog a toy and they do something wrong, you take the toy away, you've negatively punished the dog because you took away something that he wanted. Does that make sense? Which is, it's still not desirable, but it's better than positive punishment or negative reinforcement. Kind of the order is positive reinforcement, negative punishment, positive punishment, negative reinforcement, and ideally you should avoid the last two. Sometimes you can't if it's like an emergency or something, but usually you want to avoid them because those don't build trust, which is what we want to do. Your first choice is always going to be positively and reinforcement. You always want to give them something good for doing something desirable. Usually I say if they do something undesirable, you should just ignore it. If you absolutely can't ignore it, then you might negatively punish it. And then in an emergency situation, you might positively punishment or negative reinforcement. But you usually want to avoid those two at all costs if you can. That's why I said I can think of like one example of negative reinforcement because it just like doesn't come up a lot. You try to avoid it if you can. All right. Did you have a question? You want to volunteer? Okay.
You spoke earlier about removing yourself as a timeout.
Yes.
Would it be the same thing if you had to take an animal out of the situation, like put it in the crate for a minute? Like,
We would also consider that a timeout, yes. Because you can think of the desirable thing as doing a session with you, and now it's really important that it matters to the animal, because like, remember that owl I said that when I walked in the room he'd freak out? If I walk out of the room, I'm not punishing that animal. I am reinforcing him, because he freaked out and I left. He's going to do that more, right? So in that case, usually I would stick around until he calmed down and then I leave, because I'm actually reinforcing him by walking out of the room. But if you're doing a session with your dog who loves interacting with you, then if you put him in the crate and end the session, you've taken away something he wanted. He wanted to be interacting with you and you took it away from him.
like if he's getting into something, I want to stop.
That's not really punishing or reinforcing. You're just kind of removing. It's like the thing with the parrot where I said I'm not really thinking in terms of punishing or reinforcing. I'm just taking away the thing that I don't want her to have. Right? She can't interact with it if she's nowhere near it.
So I have a snake,
Mm-hmm.
and I heard from somebody at Weta, for them to be okay with you handling them, is when you're handling them, if they start sort of freaking out and like doing the zoomies, trying to like snake all over you really fast to get away, you just sort of keep handling them until they calm down and sort of relax.
Yes. This is like the thing I was talking about with the parrot where I said I'd reinforce him for sitting calmly on my hand. And it's the same thing that I was talking about with the owl just now. So if I walk into the room and he freaks out, and I walk out of the room, I have just reinforced him for freaking out. So I'm going to cause that behavior to increase in frequency. Now he's more likely to freak out when I walk in the room because now he's learned that if he freaks out when I walk in the room, he can make me go away. Right? So it's the same thing, the same concept with the snake. If you pick up the snake and he freaks out and you put him down, your snake has now learned that all he has to do to get you to put him down is freak out. If you pick up the snake and he freaks out and you keep holding him until he calms down, now he knows he can get you to put him down by being calm. There was one time we were trying to teach a hawk. We brought him to this new venue. He'd never been there before. And I had a new, this was kind of frustrating for me because I was trying not to just tell her what to do, but I had a new trainer, had her on hand. And what would happen is he'd be sitting there calmly, and she's not doing anything, and she's not doing anything, and she's not doing anything. And the bird freaks out. And then the bird stops freaking out, and he calms down, and she immediately gave him a piece of food because he calmed down again, right? And I said, you haven't actually taught that bird to stay calm. You've taught him to freak out and then calm down because the only way he's getting you to give him anything is by first freaking out. So I said, when he's just sitting there calmly doing nothing, feed, 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 feed. I'm reinforcing him for sitting calmly. And so a lot of times, everything is a behavior. An animal is never at any point not doing a behavior. If the animal is sitting there calmly and doing nothing whatsoever, the behavior they're doing is sitting there calmly. So that's what you want to reinforce, if that makes sense. Yes, no?
So when I was a kid, we had chickens, and the roosters would sometimes battle for dominance.
That is the thing chickens do.
It was a bloody affair for the loser. And I
Mhm.
always thought, it would be nice if I could train these roosters to be less violent, but it was a natural behavior. How easy is it to train away natural behavior?
Really hard. So the behaviors that are instinctual, like that the animal didn't have to be taught how to do, are really difficult to get an animal to stop doing because they have a natural instinct to want to do it. So like an example of this is migratory behavior. You have never ever seen a narwhal in an aquarium, and you never ever will, because they have a very strong like migratory instinct, and when it's time to migrate, they will bash themselves against the wall. It's time to migrate, I'm going to go, and you are never ever going to teach a narwhal not to do that. So they just don't keep them. And so this is the same thing with like chickens. We had chickens at the aquarium. They were all female, but believe it or not, the females fight a lot too. And every once in a while, something would happen, and the chickens decided it was time to fight. The only thing you can really do is separate the chickens. Don't separate them for too long, though, because then you put them back together, and it's a new chicken, and we have to fight for dominance. Oh, we had 10 minutes more. Okay, because you wanted to play a training game? Okay, I just want to make sure everybody is anybody who has not played that wants to play? We got at least one. We got two. Okay, so we'll play one game, a training game, really quick, so that everybody who wants to play has gotten a chance, and then we will answer your question. And if we run out of time, I will just answer it for you out there. Okay, come on. Who wants to be the animal? Who wants to be the trainer? We want to be the animal. You okay being the trainer? All right, animal, go stand in the corner, plug your ears, no cheating. Who wants to give our lovely trainer behavior to teach? Let's say, does she have shoelaces? Tie a shoe. We have to make sure one of them has a qualifying item. All right, animal, come on over. This one's complicated because it has preconditions. We didn't specify which one. Hey, that was a really great example of a cue. So first we taught our animal the behavior, right? He got her to tie a shoe. And then instead of, because the thing is, sometimes when you model behavior for an animal, all the animals figured out is that you want them to do the exact same thing you're doing, and they will continue modeling you instead of doing the thing you just asked them to do. So instead of modeling it again, he pointed to the shoe, right? And what did the animal do? Tied a shoe. Now, this animal chose to tie a different shoe, which is really important. You got to specify. Nobody said it had to be her shoe. So that depends on how much you care which shoe it is. All right, last question. Oh, no? You didn't have a question?
How important is it for an animal to have like a safe space?
Super important. So it's actually way more likely that an animal is going to do something if they have the opportunity to say no. So this is a really important thing to have. A lot of people have a really hard time understanding is that if you don't give the animal an option, there's a good chance they won't want to do it. But if they have the option to say no, there's a good chance they'll do it. So one thing, like a lot of times in training, we use what's called protected contact. And protected contact is sometimes about protecting you from the animal. So like if we're giving an injection to the serval, we usually are on outside of the enclosure and the serval's inside of the enclosure because then the serval can't attack you. This is the same thing with like people don't go in with tigers. The tiger's inside and you're outside and you do things with bars in between you. This is protected contact. But actually it turns out protected contact is really great for the animal too because the animal knows they can walk away and you can't follow them. So like I used to work with a coati and we'd ask her to do a voluntary nail trim behavior. She would file her own nails. It was kind of cute actually. She hated doing this though. But here's the thing, if you went in with her and asked her to do it, she was like really upset about it. But if you stood outside and asked her to do it, she'd usually do it because she knew that if she got bored, she got tired, she hates doing this, she doesn't want to do it anymore, all she has to do is walk away and there's nothing you can do about it because you're outside the enclosure and she's inside the enclosure. This is also why a well-designed zoo exhibit will have somewhere that the animal can go that they're like not on exhibit. They're in a den or behind the scenes or something that they can go there whenever. And they're actually more likely to spend time out on exhibit if they know that they don't have to.
That was just a follow-up to what you just said, which made me think of a question. Just like people, for animals, for specific species, can some be more extroverted, some be more introverted?
Yes, absolutely. And like you can know a whole lot about a species, and that really does inform like how I'm going to interact with like if you tell me that I'm going to go to your house, I'm going to train your dog, I'm going to go in with a way different mindset than if you tell me I'm going to come to your house, I'm going to train your parrot. Because those are wildly different animals. They have really different natural histories. They have different instinctual behaviors, different ways that they think, all these kinds of things. But I might go to your house and you have a dog that's really not toy motivated, right? I'm probably not going to get anywhere if I try to motivate your dog by giving it toys. But I might go to my friend's house and her dog loves toys and you can get him to do anything for a toy, right? And so that's just very different. And then sometimes you get animals that just aren't really motivated by things outside themselves. It is basically impossible to train an animal that is almost exclusively self-motivated because they just don't care about anything you can offer. I mean, you can give them food, don't care. Give them a toy, don't care. Give them attention, don't care. They don't want any of those things. So good luck. And yeah, sometimes you get birds that are really shy. Sometimes you get, we had a crow that was afraid of flying downwards. Yeah, she flipped to the roof one time, and I had to go up. And when I got up there, she like ran towards me, like, save me from this high object. And you're like, you're a bird. You flew up here, you can get back down. But other crows are like fearless. So it just depends on the animal, their history, their personality. This is also why like sometimes people ask me to consult for an animal I've never met. I say, well, I can give you some thoughts, but I make no guarantees about it'll work because I haven't met your animal and I don't know what they're like. So, one more question.
I know this is like kind of a joke, but have you ever trained like normal cats?
I have 2 cats, and they're both very well trained, actually. My cat, Soot, he will come, he targets, he gives high fives. I tried to teach him to wear a harness, and he hates that, actually. He gives kisses on command, too. I found him under a truck in the parking lot. There's nothing special about him. His brother is feral and is not quite as friendly, so he does not give high fives or target, but he does a couple other things, like he crates and stuff. Oh, yeah, they both crate on cue also, which is a wonderful behavior for a cat. You don't have to shove him in the crate. He'll just go in it. Yay. There's also, I'm not sponsored by this in any way. I recently saw an act called Cirque du Sewer, and she has trained cats and rats. She's been like on TV with her trained cats, and they like spin and dance and do long leaps and all kinds of things. The trick with cats is that the cat has to think it was his idea. If you ask a cat to do something and they think it's your idea, they probably won't want to do it. Another fun fact about cats, cats cannot understand the concept of no in the long term. So if my cat is chewing on my shoe and I tell him no, he understands that I don't want him to chew on it right now, but he does not understand that he's not supposed to chew on shoes. If you don't want a cat to do something, don't ever let them do it, because they will do it for the rest of forever. All right. I think that's it. You're welcome to ask me questions outside, but I'm handing the mic over.
Thank you so much. This was a ton of fun. Thank you all for joining us. Please give another round of applause to our wonderful speaker. Please remember to donate to the charity. We are raising money for Open Hands. Also, on Monday at, I think, 1 p.m., we are having calculations you wish we weren't doing, which is funny science order of magnitude calculations like how many Jello shots could fit in the belly of a blue whale. If you have silly questions like that and would like us to answer them on Monday, please fill out a card and put it in the bin. Otherwise, please join us at our next big events. We have Jurassic Park is a Terrible Zoo at 4 in the Hilton Crystal Ballroom, and Hard Science at 7 in Hilton Grand East. Otherwise, stay happy, stay healthy, and thanks for joining us. And please rate us in the app if you like what you saw. Thank you.